Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and this is another rendition of my Sharks quarterly grades for the defensemen and the goaltending, this time of the third quarter of the season. It was a bit of a weird 20 games for the Sharks defensively because of some injuries. At some point there was Braun injured, another point Karlsson injured, another point Vlasic injured, another point Shemek injured, and sometimes those injuries even overlapped with each other. So the only two defensemen who actually played every single game of this quarter was Brendan Dillon and Brent Burns, and both of them actually performed quite admirably in their increased roles because of this. So Brendan Dillon to start off, a first quarter B-, a second quarter B+, as he noticeably improved, and now here in the third quarter, as I said, Brendan Dillon did have to step into a more responsible role as more defensemen went down with injury. Karlsson missed significant time, Vlasic as well, and so Dillon was getting some pretty big ice time, up 20 minutes, over 20 minutes, sometimes even I think his highest was something like 24 minutes in a game. So, big ice time numbers for Brendan Dillon, and he performed in that role quite admirably. I believe he still leads the team in plus-minus. He even put up 8 assists, which for Brendan Dillon is actually a pretty large amount of assists. And so in general, I thought Dillon was quite good during these 20 games, and as such, he gets an A-. I recall when the Sharks first acquired Brendan Dillon, I was surprised that the Sharks ended up trading Jason Demers for him, and I'm sure many of the biggest memory that people had about Brendan Dillon may be coming into this season, although I think last season was also pretty good, which was his performance in the 2016 Stanley Cup Finals against the Penguins, where his pairing with Roman Polak was just getting absolutely run over by the Penguins' speed, and so it left a bit of a bad taste in the mouth of Sharks fans about Brendan Dillon, but he has looked like a completely different player since then. Next is Marc-Edouard Vlasic, who in the first quarter was a B-, in the second quarter was a pretty embarrassing C- even, and he could have potentially even been lower than that. Now here in the third quarter, he did miss a pretty significant amount of time. I believe he only actually ended up playing 10 games of the 20. He only put up a couple of assists. You'd expect Vlasic to put up a few more assists, but he hasn't been very good offensively thus far this season. But I do think the good news here is that Vlasic has been slightly better defensively in the games that he has played. Since the All-Star break, I thought he's been quite good. A couple of not great games at first when Erik Karlsson returned from injury, the game against Vancouver and the start of the game against Boston, he wasn't that great in. But otherwise, I thought he was playing some decent defense. Now, of course, when it comes to Vlasic, decent defense isn't normally what you want to see. You want to see elite defense, and I don't think Vlasic has reached that level for more than a couple of games in a row at any point this season. So he doesn't get a fantastic grade, but still he returns to what he had in the first half, which is a B-. Next is Radim Shemek, who in the first quarter was not evaluated as he didn't play enough games, or I'm not even sure if he even played more than a single game, if that. In the second quarter, he did get a B, and in this third quarter, he also a defenseman who didn't miss significant time, but he did miss a couple of games, and it was a bit of a weird quarter because I thought Shemek at the start of it was playing at some pretty good hockey, but it went down a bit, sort of like a roller coaster. It dropped to where he wasn't playing that great in a few games, but it really brought itself back up since about after the All-Star break, you could say. And so I think Shemek in general, if you look at it, 17 of the 18 games that he played or whatever, I thought in general he was pretty good, and as such he does get the similar grade as he got last time, a B. He also did chip in with I think 4 assists, which is an okay amount. Next is Justin Braun, where in the first quarter he was a B, in the second quarter he was a C+. In this quarter, he did also miss a couple of games, but really not too many. He put up, I believe, 5 assists, which is okay for Justin Braun, but I did like his play in general defensively. He also had to take a bit of an increased role because of some injuries, and I think he also stepped into it very, very well. I don't think he was necessarily at the level of what Dillon was at, but that's also because I do expect more from Braun than I do from Dillon, so that could be affecting my judgment here. But I think Braun is just maybe a step behind what Dillon was, relatively, and as such, Braun does get the grade of a B+. Next is Erik Karlsson, who's a bit of an interesting one because of the fact that he only played, I believe, 11 of the 20 games. And the thing is about Erik Karlsson is that prior to his injury, at the start of the quarter, the game against Colorado and on to the game against Arizona, but right before that one, he was very, very good, completely on fire, like playing A+ hockey. But the game against Arizona was not good at all for Erik Karlsson. After that, he basically sat out for a bunch of games as he was recovering from an injury. Then ever since his return against Vancouver, he was pretty good against Vancouver. He was okay against Boston after a pretty bad first period. He was okay against the Penguins, to decent, or to pretty good, I guess you could say. And so in general, over an 11-game period, because those, I guess, first 7 games, if I'm counting correctly, were so good for Erik Karlsson, that does carry the 3 mediocre games as well as the 1 quite bad game. And so he's not going to get his similar grade as he did last quarter with the A. He will get a pretty impressive still A-. Next is Tim Heed, who in the first 2 quarters was not evaluated because he did not play enough games for my liking in this quarter, because the fact that the Sharks were dealing with at least 1 defensive injury for the majority of the games they did play. He did play actually a significant chunk of games, but he only put up 4 assists, which for Vadim Shemek I said was okay, but for Tim Heed, who really his main draw is being an offensive defenseman, and he got some power play time, it was somewhat disappointing to see. I did appreciate that Tim Heed's defensive game did get a lot better than what it has been in the past. One of my main criticisms for Tim Heed, and one of the reasons I didn't really like him as a defenseman for the Sharks, is because his defensive game was sorely lacking, but he has improved that a good amount here in the games that he did actually get to play. But again, the offense was lacking somewhat, and so it's still an okay grade, but he brings up here with a B-. Next is Brent Burns. He had an A- in the first quarter, a B+ in the second quarter, and in this third quarter, it was his best yet. 28 points in 20 games, 6 goals, 22 assists. He now leads all defensemen in the NHL by 10 points. He has a 10-point lead over both Morgan Rielly and Mark Giordano. He has a very respectable plus-minus of +15, having gone +11 during this quarter, which is quite good if you appreciate plus-minus as a stat. He also has a 12-point lead over the next closest Sharks player, as he leads Joe Pavelski by 12 points. Pavelski sits at 56, Brent Burns at 68, and so it was just a very successful quarter offensively for Brent Burns. Extremely successful. Obviously leads the entire team in points during that time, 3 points ahead of Evander Kane. And even I thought Brent Burns had some pretty solid defensive games. I've liked his plays where he's been stepping up at the blue line on the penalty kill. He's actually transitioned that into some shorthanded goals. We saw it yesterday against the Penguins. We saw it against the Calgary Flames a couple of weeks ago. And just to put it in perspective, Brent Burns has 5 shorthanded points this season, and in his 7 prior seasons with the San Jose Sharks, he only had a combined 4 shorthanded points. So he's definitely been making some much better plays shorthanded and being able to convert that even into offense this season than in seasons past, which I do appreciate. Now, the reason why he's not going to be getting a perfect grade is because there have still been occasional misplays from Brent Burns, and maybe I would be able to overlook that if the misplays from Brent Burns weren't just so egregious. I mean, they look really, really bad, which is why they really stick out when you evaluate him at the end of the game, right? Because he could make so many great plays, and all of a sudden he just gives the puck away in a dangerous area to one of the opposing players, and it's just sometimes it rattles your mind. And it's not really a surprise. Brent Burns makes so many aggressive passes from his own zone to try and break it down in the ice that I guess you're bound to end up having one of these bad giveaways. I mean, you take a look at some of the giveaway leaders, and Erik Karlsson is pretty consistently up there, at least when he was with the Ottawa Senators, because he makes so many of those types of passes. Same with Brent Burns. We even saw Drew Doughty sometimes up there because he makes so many of those passes and he plays so many minutes. And so it's bound to happen, but still definitely some pretty egregious misplays. Sometimes he tries for a stretch pass that goes all the way down the ice for an icing that it doesn't even seem like anyone could have potentially touched. And so if the misplays didn't stick out so much, maybe he could have a perfect grade with his 28-point stretch. But it's still a very, very respectable A, and you could even argue that he was the Sharks' MVP over these 20 games, but you definitely have a tough time doing that with Evander Kane and Tomas Hertl as potential candidates as well. On to the goaltending. Martin Jones here, the starter for the Sharks, a C in the first quarter, a B in the second quarter. In this third quarter, he started 17 of the 20 games, which is a pretty big number, honestly. He put up a shutout against the Pittsburgh Penguins. In 10 of those 17 games, he put up a above 900 save percentage, which isn't really much to gloat about when you're talking about a starting goaltender. Normally, you expect at the very least that, but with Martin Jones's stats, I guess it's pretty good. Over the full 17 games, he put up just about a 900 save percentage, or a .900 save percentage, I guess I should say. I would say in those 10 games that he did have over a 900 save percentage, he was very good, or good enough. I thought a couple of them, even if they were below 900, I thought they were still quite good games. For instance, the first one against the Avalanche, where the Sharks ended up winning 5-4 because they let the Avalanche back into that game when it was 5-1. I thought Jones actually played pretty well that game, even if he did let in the 4 goals. Same with that first game against Tampa, where he lets in 2 goals on 19 shots, so it's technically sub 900 save percentage. I would say there's about maybe 3 to 4 games which were quite bad for Martin Jones. The game against the Panthers comes to mind. The second game against the Lightning wasn't that great. The game against the Bruins for sure. But otherwise, Jones did win 13 of those 17 games, 14 of the 17 if you count the Boston Bruins one as a win, which I'm going to go to my grave saying that I do count that one as a win, even if it doesn't count in the standings. And so, there's going to be some people who are going to argue Martin Jones should get a good grade for this reason. There are going to be some people who argue Martin Jones should get a really bad grade for the, just looking at the stats. But I'm going to give him a pretty above average, I would say, because I do think he was above average during the stretch, a grade of a B. On to the backup, Aaron Dell. He had a B in the first quarter, but a C- in the second quarter. He only actually started 3 games this quarter, 2 of them against the Oilers and another against the Arizona Coyotes. He did make 2 other appearances. Those were in relief in the game against the Lightning and the game against the Panthers, but he really didn't play a significant amount of time in those games. In the games against the Oilers, I thought he was pretty good, but again, it was the Oilers. In the game against Arizona, I thought he made some good saves, but he also let in some pretty bad goals, especially the first one, which was not good and got that game off to a pretty rough start. And so in general, it was okay for Dell. He had okay stats, but the thing is, his quality of competition was so low that I don't even know if I can, give him a fantastic grade because of the okay stats. Just purely based on stats, you could maybe give him like a B, but because the quality of competition wasn't that great, and if you actually evaluate his performances in that game, they weren't also that great, I do still give him a C+, better than what he had last quarter, but still nothing fantastic. But that will do it for this. It's pretty clear that the Sharks' best defenseman during these past 20 games was Brent Burns. He played every single game along with Brendan Dillon. He was, not on the same pairing as Brendan Dillon, but Brendan Dillon also played all 20 games is what I mean. And Brent Burns putting up 28 points, as I said, leading all defensemen by a margin of 10 points at the very least. He's just putting up a very, very good season thus far. He's 8 points off his career high in points. That was the year he won the Norris. And so I had predicted, I guess maybe it was a month and a half ago or something, that it would be Mark Giordano lifting the Norris by the end of the season, because I thought the narrative was behind him. But Brent Burns, if he continues to put up points at this pace and he actually ends up the season at over 82 points in the 82 games that he will most likely play unless he gets injured, I really think it might be his Norris to lose. Class dismissed.